welcome to We're In, a podcast that gets inside the brightest minds in cybersecurity. I'm your host, Blake Thompson-Hoyer, and joining me today is none other than Rob T. Lee, Chief of Research at the SANS Institute. Rob, thanks so much for joining the podcast.
Hey, Blake. Really enjoy being invited on here. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Now, jumping right in, you've been called the, quote, Godfather of Digital Forensics and Incident Response. How did you come by that?
The other Robert M. Lee, there was a 10 years of the Digital Forensics Incident Response Summit. They were kind of presenting my impact on digital forensics, and they had Robert M. Lee go up there and says, Rob is the Godfather of Digital Forensics, and everyone was like, oh, that's perfect. And it was during that it kind of came around and kind of stuck. So thankfully, I did not self-moniker because I think that's just weird when people do that. But just like call signs from the Air Force, which I'm wearing right here, is that you're given your call sign, you're not able to veto it, is what it comes down to. So
the follow up there is, would you have vetoed it if given the option, or
I am a very it's everyone else. I like helping out folks in the mission. It's one of the reasons I've always enjoyed teaching, is that you're arming people for the front lines of what they're going to experience, and if I'm able to help them do that, that's great. Not in it to be a hood ornament or, do this for ego. I actually kind of like being behind the scenes. People remember, hey, I'm where you're at because I took your class, and I'm like, oh, great. So, you're writing books and all this stuff, and I was able to get you started. So I'm more of, I don't like the spotlight. I was vetoing it for a long time, but then someone else said, mostly my PR team said, nope, you got to use it. And I'm like, all right.
Well, and I feel like if it's coming from Rob M. Lee as well, also a friend of the podcast, incidentally, that also cements it even more there.
Yeah.
Now, you've worked at the SANS Institute for many years in a variety of roles. It's obviously an organization with, that's just been central to your career. So many We're In listeners are no doubt familiar with SANS and its resources, certs, and courses, but for those that aren't in the know or are new to the SANS Institute, how would you bring them up to speed, and how can you describe your roles there?
For many years, I was, how I ended up getting pulled into SANS is they identify a practitioner in the field and say, hey, would you give a talk based off of what you're discovering? And that's really how I started. And for nearly 20 years, I'm a contractor, practitioner in the field doing, cybersecurity, starting businesses, working with Mandiant, Mantech, Air Force. So they basically have someone, teach as a, hey, come teach, but then go back and fight the battle. And we still have that. 4 years ago, they asked me to come on board as one of their executives, because they need more content people to be a part of their executive team. So I decided to join full time at that point. And so officially I've only been an employee for 4 years with SANS. But the impact of what SANS has overall, is why I'm there. Alan Paul, our founder, really lived by the moniker that, we're the most trusted cybersecurity capability for both training, certifications, knowledge. And it's that last piece, knowledge, that it really drives me. It's like the other pieces are, honestly, they're products of ours and we sell them. But in reality, like SANS creates a lot of assets, resources, and capabilities for the community for free. We have a lot of resources dedicated to training the workforce, and it's that mission impact because being former military, the battles that are being fought by our country and the adversaries are not on a military front line. They're on corporate, financial, systems, medical systems, obviously power, water, the critical infrastructure systems, but you attack any one of these and you're able to get people to worry about their retirement and 401k and be able to withdraw from it. And I tell people and military commanders this all the time, even if these folks leave the military, they're leaving to go to the front lines. They're, front lines are not, defending Air Force bases, from cyber attack. It's the front lines are defending the power grid, and that's all civilian infrastructure.
Now, let's talk a little bit about your military service. You've got the Air Force shirt on. You were a founding officer at the 609th Information Warfare Squadron, really designated as, my understanding, the first warfare division of its kind in U.S. history. How has that military background shaped your approach to cyber and digital forensics throughout your career?
Greatly. Both my father and my grandfather were career in the U.S. Air Force, and little known interesting fact. My grandfather was the first deputy director of the NSA, so we have this long history of service. And so I went to the Air Force Academy. I have this massive mission drive to help people to drive businesses to the right area. And right now, I call it my massive transformative purpose is helping businesses align to AI business transformation in a secure way. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the more I'm able to do that, the more I truly believe that not only are defending these systems from adversarial attacks, but helping these businesses weather the AI transformation that's ongoing. So you don't have businesses go out of business, that you're able to maintain structure and maintain what you're doing. But also have a way to do that, that's secure and risk averse.
Of course. And you kind of alluded to this in earlier comments, the almost fluidity between military service, institutes like SANS that are trying to tap into the frontline practitioners who really know their stuff, not only talk the talk, but have walked the walk, and organizations that you worked at like Mandiant, right? And my understanding, you've been involved in creating the M-Trends APT report. Some of these private sector cybersecurity firms, they've almost grown to behave like their own intelligence apparatus. And I mean that in a good way, in the sense of producing quality research that's used not only by industry, but frankly has informed indictments and things of that nature and is pretty
100%.
intense. What are you watching out for next when it comes to APT activity?
Well, I mean, first of all, you're spot on, because the front lines are actually civilian infrastructure, whether it's a pharmaceutical industry or whether it's a financial firm, Dow Chemicals, anything. So we need to, taking a look at that, of course, when we're able to look at these reports. And I remember sitting back in Mandiant, we were coming out with our first APT report, and everyone was afraid in the community. It's you can't name it China. That is all classified information. I'm like, well, we're staring at it, and when we're doing these incident response engagements, and so we felt exposing it more and more was part of our duty. And even the term APT, its gestation, where did it really come from? So the nation state adversaries, I've been investigating them ever since 1998. When, if you go Google this, it's kind of an interesting fun fact. Moonlight Maze was one of the first official, Russian-based attacks against U.S. Laboratories, to gain, information. That led to the formation of JTF-C&D, Joint Task Force Computer Network Defense, and later became Cyber Command. But being a part of those investigations, kind of, been fighting nation-state adversaries all along, has been fascinating. Where things are kind of trending now is nation-state capabilities required hundreds of people, to potentially do, the development of the tools, operations, and more. And, I get a little bit sideways here, because before you would end up having the most advanced folks in the nation-state adversaries, but it also was a reverse variant. You also employed the massive amount of funds to accomplish that. Organized crime, one level down, hacktivists. And what we're going to be able to see with AI is the ability for a hacktivist to leverage the same capabilities as a nation state, which gets interesting quick, because if you have a single group out there, one or two individuals, that say, hey, we want to knock out a power grid, it is theoretically possible with AI-based capabilities that they're going to be able to leverage the same type of power as a nation state more quickly than they were before. So it's a leveling, AI is a leveling aspect against the different groups out there that are using, attacking infrastructure. And so that's a concern of mine, because before, nation state actors will obviously not take care of power grid because of potential attribution and that likelihood of it crossing over to a kinetic combat. Obviously bullets flying, saying, hey, disrupt,
Sure.
medical.
Yeah. Is this an act of war, or attack
it's an act of war.
Civilian infrastructure? Yeah.
Now you're going to potentially have, one or two people that could affect, the same type of destruction. It's kind of like, the same group with the dirty bomb, these kind of things. It hasn't happened, obviously, but I keep on raising the flag a little bit that AI is the great leveler that's going to occur in our, at least the adversary groups that we're looking at.
That's so interesting. And you hear the AI companies, Anthropic, of course, comes to mind, trying to do some work on AI safety, crafting models in such a way that they can't be abused to help create a recipe for a dirty bomb, or they can't be used to say, hey, find all the low-hanging fruit vulnerabilities in this power grid system and give us a foothold in the ICS or the industrial control system, what have you. it sounds like you're skeptical that those safeguards might keep out the attackers.
Well, talking about two different things: AI enabling capabilities, meaning you can move faster with greater velocity. So if you have a single individual want to code up a swarm, I mean, think of it like drones. You can see these swarms of drones like attack a ship or something. It's very similar where you have a single individual that could swarm a target with multiple different agents. What you just referenced there is the ability to establish guardrails and restrictions in the different models. So someone can't write malicious code, they can't write spear phishing emails, they can't look up, like how do I create a bomb? Now, having said that, the competitiveness in the different groups, Anthropic, OpenAI, DeepSeek, and the others, when you end up taking a look at how competitive it is for them to release models, it is fascinating to see that even the difference between GPT-4o and 4.1, we've been able to test both models, and the guardrails that were in 4.0 didn't exist in 4.1. And it's not like they're trying to take them out. It's just they're rushing things to the market as quick as possible, remain competitive, and they're not putting in testing the guardrails to be able to make sure that people can't do weird things. But we're able to create, spear phishing emails, even using terms be as evil as possible, evil this, evil that, and it still, it was creating the emails. So it's kind of fascinating that the real risk is competitiveness and moving fast. We're trying to slow them down and be able to say, do we have the security safeguards in place? Both of these things end up being cross-dynamic and creating friction, when you're trying to basically satisfy investors to say, hey, and it's, again, that's where we see people fail, is adopting a proper security culture when you're being driven to innovation and revenue.
I do want to flip back to some of your SANS work soon, but this AI conversation is just too fascinating. And honestly, at my organization, we talk a lot about the potential for adversaries to start leveraging agentic AI. That's something that we've started to see possibilities with some of these agents, that they're powerful enough to exploit certain low-hanging fruit type vulnerabilities, right? Like if something's a pretty obvious cross-site scripting, or if something's a pretty obvious, IDOR or whatever it is, that like is not going to be 301 level, needs a human in the loop, really looking under the hood at that some 0 day or whatever. But that said, well, the writing might be on the wall there, and I think it's kind of accepted that these agentic threats, certainly would enable the bad actors you're referring to scale way more than they ever had the chance to. But have you really seen evidence of these sorts of breaches playing out like in the wild? Is this a here now kind of thing, or is it more like a year or two on the horizon?
It's a here now thing that we're seeing.
Dang it. I was hoping we might have some more time.
Do we have direct evidence of it? Anecdotally, yes. Even Google's come out and said the velocity of intrusions has increased so fast that it's not possible to get these gains without some help. It's all of a sudden seeing a friend, all of a sudden just like being muscled out. And you're like, okay, I know that's not a natural growth. So, are you taking, HGH or something like that? That's essentially what we're seeing. Do we actually have videotape and monitoring of them using this? So recently, OpenAI released a report. Actually, it was kind of a notification that they've, recently booted a bunch of foreign actors from their systems. Primarily using ChatGPT and others, that they had accounts and they were able to detect somehow that there was being done. So this is kind of the digital forensics of the future, which is be able to tell that this is a bad actor, they're employed by a nation state and so forth. And OpenAI, real big hat tip to them for not only finding them, acknowledging it, and saying get off our systems and banning those accounts. It's not going to stop the nation state adversaries. It's pretty easy to replicate accounts, but I think they're signaling very much so that we could see what you're doing. But that is, that's hard proof that even Google said they were able to take adversaries, using Gemini. So are we leaning into more agentic? Yes. How fast? I have to assume a lot of the stuff, because of what I used to work for on the offensive side in the US government, that so many of those aspects of it are really closely guarded capabilities. And how fast and how vicious that groups like Typhoon Salt and Typhoon Volt are able to penetrate both telecommunications and critical infrastructure networks and to stay there and not be able to be fully remediated is a drastic concern. Now, are they starting to leverage AI to assist there? Undoubtedly. Are they fully coding agentic, obviously reasoning, drone type capabilities inside a network? Well, no one's detected it yet, but again, the velocity may be so fast that we don't have the defenses that are able to match velocity. So it's kind of like a supersonic missile, and we just like, okay, our interceptors are used to catching something a lot less fast than that, and so you're going to be always playing this catch-up game with offense, and that's traditionally always been the case.
Well, and I imagine it's really hard to go reverse engineer these and say for sure something was an AI-enabled adversarial threat, right? Like I'm in the content business, right? I do a lot of communications work. I'll use AI to, help write something or sharpen an email. And I don't expect the receiving end person on the other end to know that I used AI for that. They might make some assumptions, but are there similar challenges playing out where attributing something to an AI agent is technically just not feasible?
It's possible. The greatest thing that we're seeing right now is used by organized crime and scams using deepfakes. And again, they might be, and we've seen this on more of the celebrity stuff they might see on like social media, or something sent to you is like, hey, I'm Elon Musk, and I have the greatest deal ever. You invest in this Bitcoin thing, and it's what I advise. You only have like 10 days to get in the initial round or whatnot. And then they'll send a takedown order, and all of a sudden 10 different variants now pop up. And so this chasing via legal is becoming more problematic. And you're just using deepfake technology, what it exists today is fairly convincing, and organized crime is definitely utilizing those type of technologies. So when you talk about AI, it's not just agentic, it's all these technologies, and you could say from scams all the way down to political influence operations. Everyone points to the Biden thing, but I was like, that's too basic, for what's about to occur.
I feel like with somebody with your background and varied career, I mean, you mentioned earlier Moonlight Maze, you're probably familiar with Eligible Receiver and some of these early exercises and whatnot. Yeah. You've witnessed several technological transformations. I feel like sometimes new changes like the AI and generative AI era can be helpfully put into context by previous shifts, right? One that comes to mind for me, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, is shift to the cloud. How has that impacted the field of digital forensics, particularly for Windows environments?
So you're specifically asking about like transition to the cloud versus AI, or?
Yeah, I guess we could start with a comparison between AI and cloud. I feel like, I've seen some analysis that like back in 2011, people were sick of seeing cloud everywhere as a buzzword, right? And now it's like people are sick of seeing AI everywhere as a buzzword. And now guess what? We're still operating in the cloud. That hasn't gone anywhere. I expect 10 years from now, we'll still have AI to some extent. But, what analogs are there from past, and maybe not even cloud, if there are other examples that spring to mind that can help put into context what AI is doing to this industry?
Well, I mean, first of all, cloud is a transparent layer. Like no one, like your sister, brother, partner, parents, kids, they really don't know if something's in the cloud or not. They don't really care. And in fact, it's not like here, there's cloud thing that's in the cloud, you have to deal with it. However, a good analogy is this thing. And you end up taking a look at their phones, like everyone has a phone now. AI is very similar to a technology that is going to permeate into every aspect of everyone's lives. And it'll be very clear. Unlike cloud, it's a tech stack that basically moves things from data centers and co-locations where you work into like a data center, which is again tied to software as a service in the cloud, like Exchange Online, O365 and whatnot. Azure, like maybe the cloud segments. But the key here is really looking at the implications of what this technology is. And the way I view it, and again, I don't even think it's an extreme view, is that the internet, when people were predicting what this is going to be in like early 90s, like AT&T had these massive, really cool commercials called the You Will commercials. It's worth a, go Google that. It's just eye-opening. No one knew what email was. No one knew what web browsing was. And they're talking about flat screen TVs to be able to watch movies at any time. And you're like, that still took, 15 years to really come to fruition, but they predicted it. The internet is probably the closest analogy. you and I and others will remember life before, life after internet. And,
Those horrible noises, as you're dialing up for the first internet
yeah.
connections. Apologies
And
to listeners.
it's that kind of thing where, like, even executives, I tell them today, I said, listen, you're making business strategies based off technologies you don't understand. And I put it in context for them. It's like you're sitting back in 1998 trying to make a business strategy for the internet, and you never use a web browser and email. Now, I'm not saying you need to be an expert in this, but you need to start touching the fundamental technologies for what it means. Taking a step further, I believe AI is such a significant change in human condition and it's so rapid and onset that for most individuals, it is going to be overwhelming, but B, it is likely as significant as the human race being able to write. That is, massive technological change from being able to record history and be able to write things down, whereas AI is going to have that significant impact. In fact, I'm going to go as far as saying in 20 years, you're not going to remember who's the president of the United States. In fact, you'll probably have to think about it. What you will remember, though, is this is when AI happened. This is the before and after. And you'll remember the before times, the after times, and your kids will, like my kids today, 13, they will be part of that before and after because that's the same age I was. They will remember, how did you do that before AI? I'm like, I don't know. What did they teach you in school? It's going to be completely different. And they're going to say, I was in a classroom and I had these teachers, and their kids are going to look at them like they're nuts. Very similarly, another analogy is this: is everybody put out of jobs? No, there's going to be brand new jobs. It's basically utilizing AI. But like if you told your parents, like I hire someone to meet me at the gym and they tell me to lift heavy things and they're going to count for me while I lift these heavy things. And they're called personal trainers. And they're like, you pay someone to do this job? I mean, you could see this disconnect that would occur if we told someone what a future job is going to do. And they're going to be, I don't understand why would you pay someone to do that? These jobs don't exist yet, but they will exist. And I get excited about it because I'm more on the, very positive outlook on the way AI is going to change everything and for the better. I just think everyone's jobs will just change and you'll be doing something else. This could be exciting.
Well, I guess we'll have to check back and invite you back on for season 24 of We're In and see how it all plays out. But no, I agree. I think personally, I fall into the more excited camp as well. I want to talk about Forensics 500 for a minute because it's such a mainstay for anybody wanting to enter the field. How would you recommend somebody just starting out prepare for a course like that?
When I was initially designing the course, we knew a lot of law enforcement would be taking this course. And so in that mindset, do you have to have a deep technical background? The answer is no. I always tell people, I said, listen, you could come to the class, everything is guided. And as long as you don't reject a mouse and a keyboard, it's going to teach you skills. So do you have to have like a computer science degree? I'm like, no, I'm trying to train law enforcement to potentially put bad guys away. And most of them don't have computer science degrees. And if we set the class at that tone, but we also don't want to have, the auto forensics, here run these tools against it and boom, here's your report. You need to understand the basics enough on the Windows system to be able to say, here's where these artifacts are. And in my opinion, they're no different than DNA, fingerprints, gun residue. These are the things that most law enforcement are trained. But again, very, scientific. If someone's saying, hey, that's DNA, do you understand what that means? You have to understand the core of it, what it can mean for your case, how are you going to be able to use this in court, what you're asking the lab folks to potentially go back and do. But when you're in a crime scene, it's one of the reasons like no one touch anything because you're aware DNA exists. It doesn't mean you have to be a genome, using a CRISPR technology to be able to understand how this fits together. It's, I tell folks, as long as you're able to identify DNA, gun residue, fingerprints, hair follicles, what does that all show you? You could do digital forensics because you just change the name of things and it's exactly the same.
What are some of those analogies? Because I love that analogy. I think that's really helpful to kind of imagine what is meant by this field. Like, what are some of the equivalents, the digital equivalents of, fingernails, hair follicles, and whatnot?
So on a Windows system, and it's great you asked that, I categorize things by evidence of categories. For example, you go through, can you tell someone executed a program and specifically how they executed that program? So if you're executing things from your taskbar or it's on your desktop, if you're launching a menu, we're able to detect that. So you get into human habits. And, myself and Heather Barnhart have consulted with the FBI's Behavioral Analytical Unit. That's the Criminal Minds, on the TV show. And they're very interested in, finding out, like, can you tell human habits from these forensic artifacts? I'm like, yes, because you could see, like, for example, you have a very habitual way of what you do things in the morning when you get on your system, like which websites you go to. All of these things kind of add up to, like, we could watch if you're opening up files, which web sites you're going to, how you're executing things. Do you type it in or are you clicking on a bookmark? All of these things I'm able to tell the human behind it, not just that someone did it, how they got to it. And because of that very rigorous path, very similar to what you have on your hands, you have a very habitual way of approaching technology. Do you save everything to your downloads folder or do you put them in a specific folder? All of these things, I could see what you downloaded, what you opened, how you opened it, how you executed things, which programs you used. How do we know it's you versus Wendy, who was on your computer system? Like, it's because the next one that's going to come up is like, prove it to me it's not AI. And, the AI is going to have to monitor exactly the way you do things on a daily basis and replicate that for it to be AI. But having someone else sit down at your keyboard and start doing things, it is such a different fingerprint that's on the system and the way you do things, your very clear habits, that it's nearly impossible to have someone argue that it's the same person unless they've watched you specifically and do all these things.
If you see me with inbox 0, it's an imposter. All right.
Exactly.
No, that's really interesting. And it's a good point that these digital habits that we might not even consciously think of, but that we're leaving everywhere like breadcrumbs, that a forensic investigator such as yourself could swing in and piece together. Hey, wait a minute. No, this account was hijacked because they're doing something very different all of a sudden that doesn't track with your morning Washington Post and New York Times reading or what have you, right? Now, I would be curious, who do you look up to in cyber and who would you most like to rope into teaching a SANS course?
Oh, that's a great question. I have a huge, fanboy feeling toward Cliff Stoll. Like, I've seen him present. I've met him multiple times. And he's just, telling the story of, the initial incident response investigations that he was a part of. And, it's worth, a lot of people are like, who the hell is he? But so you go back in history, he's like one of the first, did it. But now he has this very fascinating, almost Doc Brown from Back to the Future style to him, in which it's still engaging. He still, insists on using what was the old projector with the written slides for your presentations.
Oh gosh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yep.
It's losing, but it's that he was like, I'm not using PowerPoint. I'm using it's kind of like forcing function. Because he has this, discussion down and everything. But Cliff Stoll's one of these individuals that is just having a drink and a beer with him, and you could sit there for like 5-6 hours and not get tired. It's individuals like that that are pioneers. Another one is a big, and of course the individual's passed away now, is Alvin Toffler. Not many people know who he is, but he was in the late 70s or early 70s, 1970 in fact, published a paper on the future of computing and AI in society, and ended up writing 2 books, Future Shock and The Third Wave. And in Future Shock, he's the one who kind of coined information overload and things like techno, which the entire music industry, bought into. Is like, that's what we're going to call this. And he was so future thinking that a lot of his predictions came true. And it's a fascinating book to read, now in 2025 when you go back and look what he wrote in 1970. Just sitting down with someone who is just so prescient and able to look at things pragmatically and seeing what the impact is on humans, what's going to occur, not just from, hey, I predict in the future, people will be watching flat screen TVs, but more of like the social impact of what the changes, will be to the average individual. And he was also diving into AI a lot too. And one of his key phrases, and I love this about him, is really talking about human beings in this, this 50-year period here, from when he wrote that till now, is those who can learn, unlearn, and relearn. Is this a cycle that we kind of as a society kind of think, You go through grade school, go through high school, go through college, and you're now done. That the idea of like perpetual learning needs to be, kind of the set. That's one of the reasons SANS Institute others exist, is like you're never done. Yeah. Learn, unlearn, relearn. Learn, unlearn, relearn. It's just this cycle you're going to be going through again and again and again until you pass away. And again, that's something I want to teach my kids, is like, hey, school's never done. You're always in school. It just changes, how you potentially perceive it.
Well, and that's especially apt, of course, for the cybersecurity industry. As tech stacks evolve, people are constantly layering on new software, new things that we haven't even thought of yet. AI agents, we spent a lot of the podcast talking about. There's never a dull moment, that's for sure. And and it's great that institutes, of course, like SANS exist to help guide. And to hear more, definitely check out Rob T. Lee's courses at SANS. Quite famous, I should add. We are talking to the Godfather here, so had to bring that up one more time.
I'm turning my camera off.
I know. Well, before you do, I do have one question that we ask all of our guests on the podcast, which is, what's something that we wouldn't know about you, Rob, just by looking at your LinkedIn profile?
It goes back to my kids. Like I have a 13-year-old boy and girl twins, and just how much I love being a father. And it's tough because you sit there and you're like doing all this nerd stuff all the time and you want to expose them to it, but they're also 13 years old. You just don't pick up on, someone's mentality when it comes to, the family side and what you like to do with your kids and what you expose them to and what's like a day in the life for you. I mean, kind of a hint behind the stuff I'm into, but that's like tertiary compared to just trying to be the best person you can, both, in your day job and, like what your principles are and so forth. But none of that stuff comes across in your profile. I always tell coworkers, it's like we run around each other all the time and run Zooms, and all we do is focus on the Zooms. No one knows what each other's spouses are and their kids' names in many cases. And I think we've gotten away from that a little bit society-wise because of remote work and whatnot. And I think it's important for people to know, like, who their family is, the kids and so forth. It's hard because it's really, you have to get in someone's mind. But I think from an aspect of people just glance at it, they won't know I'm a dad of twins. That's kind of the key.
That's really special. And as a father of one, a 20-month-old, I can certainly respect raising twins. That's impressive. Honestly, you probably should list that on your LinkedIn, because that is one heck of a skill, is dad to twins. And I'm sure they appreciate that as well.
Go back into the massive, long, like father of twins, like twins, like breaker of chains and everything else.
There we go. I should have introed you right at the outset with that. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, Rob. Really appreciate your perspectives and really fascinating discussion.
No, it's great. The work you guys do on these podcasts is very important, because I do believe that this is one of the key reasons how people learn is, by having these discussions and getting them to think. So really hat tip to you for doing these, and because it's a lot of work. You don't know it on the front side of it because it looks like it's all polished. But everyone on your team and what you're trying to do here, it takes a lot of work to get these out. So hat tip to you guys.
Oh, I appreciate that. And now we know we're inviting you back for season 24 after that comment. So, well, thanks, Rob.